Live in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America, together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
Welcome back. It's hour 2 of the Jeff Santos Show. Welcome to it, folks. We are on Zoom today, as well as on AM 1530, revolutionradionetwork.com. And we have a great second hour coming up here, folks. We're going to do a third hour. Nina Turner, former state senator from Ohio, and, of course, part of the Bernie Sanders campaign, will join us at about 5:06. And Alan Grayson, former congressman, who has a record for the most bills and amendments. You'll learn that, by the way, from Bernie Sanders. Will join us at about 5:34. But we got a super panel, and we're having people join us as we speak here on Zoom. And we're going to be, just a power-packed hour. It is the powerhouse. Harvey Kaye, of course, from University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, remains with us. Harvey, it's great to have you on board on, I guess, in your usual slot, as we have done it in the past couple of months. Welcome. We're also joined by the great economist, Rob Scott of EPI. Rob, welcome. You are a Friday guy, but a little bit later than normal. It's great to have you with us. John Nichols of The Nation and his great new book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party. And he is with us, of course, the national affairs correspondent of The Nation magazine. We are waiting on a number of folks, but Joe Samberg, Aspiration, a great bank, folks. We're going to talk more about this as we move forward into this 1 hour. It is really something that we need to look at. And he is somebody who's thinking about running for office, which is another angle that we need to talk about, too. Joe Samberg with us. We're going to be talking with Wendell Potter. He, of course, the whistleblower from Aetna and Cigna, now business president of Business for Medicare for All. Melissa Tomlinson of Badass Teachers is also about to join us. Of course, the best name in politics, and very, very important, labor and teachers. Really, if you think about it, folks, maybe the two most important professions. We're seeing this now, and it's been evident with nurses in this pandemic. And, of course, we're going to see it as we get into the fall when schools open up, and that will be the issue of teachers. So they will be joining us as well. And we'll be joined by a couple of our regular callers, Mark from San Francisco and Stephen from Livermore, California, just outside of San Francisco. And I can never forget Robert Kraig of Wisconsin Citizen Action. In fact, we'll have 3 people from Wisconsin on this panel. We planned it that way, tell you the truth. We wanted to get a perspective of the great state of Wisconsin, which may very well be the determinative state in the challenge in November, if we do indeed have an election. So I want to start around here. We talked in the first hour panel with a number of great folks, Robert Borsage, David Dayen of the American Prospect, and a number of folks, Norman Solomon of Roots Action. And, we're all sort of focused here on Biden, on Pelosi. But one of the names that came up, and I want to start off with you, Harvey, is Pramila Jayapal and her, I think, really maneuvering to get some moderates, even as Pelosi turned down the Paycheck Recovery Act to keep people on their payrolls, as Germany has done, and so forth. And I think, to me, this is where the progressive community really has to sort of, I think, not only help her, but sort of use the model of reaching out to moderates, not just to become progressive members. We don't need people who are half the time with us, but to work with them to pass important legislation. Start us off there, Harvey. Did we lose Harvey? All right. Let me start off with you, Rob, because you're dealing with the economic plan. Rob Scott of the Economic Policy Institute. Is this a way to sort of start the ball rolling to help people who are suffering right now?
Absolutely. We've got to extend relief. We've just got the latest numbers. My colleague Heidi Shearholtz put this out Yesterday, we've got almost 25% of all jobs eliminated. We've had some 27 million people file for unemployment so far. That's our conservative numbers, unadjusted for seasonal variation. We think that's a more accurate number. And an additional 9.1 million people who've applied for the pandemic unemployment assistance. So in total, over 36 million workers. That's almost a quarter of all workforce and workers. And that doesn't include people who can't apply for unemployment of either kind, say because they're college students who just graduated, or they're at home taking care of a child, or they're immigrants. So we think the real number is probably a third higher. So this is just historic levels of unemployment, perhaps in excess of what we had in the Great Depression. So we need relief. We need it now to keep people in their homes and to keep food on their tables.
Let me ask this to John Nichols as well. I really think that her maneuvering around Pelosi is something that Democrats need to learn from. It to me, John, is that we don't have, in my view, enough folks that think outside the box. And we talk about the idea of being creative. I think that leadership here is being shown. And I think we need this. I think we need with Germany. I know you spend a lot of time there. This is a critical moment for the progressive movement, which you write about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that what she's doing is important. It's not uncommon. I mean, this is generally what you would do in any kind of legislative fight. But because of the bizarre circumstance we're in, where you don't have the normal interaction in Congress that you would usually have, it becomes a more complex and difficult thing. I think what Jayapal's doing with reaching out to some of the moderates makes sense. And it also kind of rejects the dim-witted way in which our media tends to cover politics. There's a tendency to imagine that a more moderate member on some set of issues wouldn't necessarily be interested in taking care of displaced workers and unemployed people in his or her district. That's absurd. Of course you can build a coalition for this. And the reality is it's somewhat easier to build a coalition for this than for a lot of other things. So this makes sense at this time. And I would note that Jayapal, as well as Mark Pocan, they're the co-chairs of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And so they are really leaders in the House already. Additionally, it's important to note that while they're working on this issue, they're also working on another great issue. Along with members of the squad, just this week, they launched a major initiative to call for cuts in defense spending to help to fund the response to the COVID-19 crisis and mass employment. So they're really on the cutting edge, not just on plans specifically for the jobless folks, but also on issues like finding the money to pay for all the things we have to do.
Joe Samberg, you obviously, your entire idea of a great business is to work with people who need help. Obviously, these people need help, and keeping them on their payroll, is much better than an unemployment check that can be extended and extended and extended. It would just seem to me that what Jayapal is doing is maybe a wave of the future.
Well, there's another critically important element to what Jayapal is doing, and that is how her approach will protect and even revitalize small business. The current approach that's focused on sending people more unemployment insurance, well, on the surface might seem like it's buttressing the spending needs for individuals, is going to rapidly accelerate the concentration of corporate power in the hands of a tiny number of companies. And I'm terrified, and we all should be terrified and focused in as progressives about what was already underway pre-COVID, and that is corporations in a small number were gaining more power, and what's massively accelerating now. And if we go this unemployment route continuously with the more insurance, what's going to happen is millions of small businesses won't exist when people are ready to go back to work. One of the great wisdoms of Jayapal's approach is it ensures that these small businesses don't go out of business in the first place. And I just cannot emphasize this enough. One of the things that keeps me up at night is how we are hurtling towards a future where there are going to be 50 to 100 companies that control everything we buy and control where almost everyone works. And that's a future with even worse wages than we presently have. And believe it or not, what's at stake with the Jayapal approach versus the more establishment approach is whether we massively accelerate this concentration or whether we turn the tide back towards small businesses.
We have regained our good friend Harvey Kaye. Harvey, can you hear me?
I can indeed. Yes, thank you.
Well, I think we are trying to, I think look at the idea of Ms. Jayapal as really somebody who we can look to, like Joe, maybe the future of the Democratic Party. And I just think that whatever our folks can do, whether we're talking about, your colleagues at Roots Action or Borsaj, a Campaign for America's Future and People's Action, Robert Kraig, part of that as well, should be joining us any second. I think there's going to be a concerted effort to help her. That to me, because I think that we're going to be missing an opportunity if we don't. Harvey?
I'm sorry. I got waylaid a bit there. Yeah, no, it's striking the degree to which we see a sort of, well, I don't want to call it a splintering, but there's already a fragmentation going on in the Democratic Party, right? I mean, this is what this is really about. And the question is whether or not the older generation of Democratic congressional leaders will make way for this younger, aspiring generation. And I mean, obviously, we're talking about folks who are even older than I am inside of the Congress running the Democratic Party. I mean, I think there are a lot of great insurgents also challenging, standard bearers and stalwarts of the Democratic Party. But it really is imperative that in fact we see these changes take place. Otherwise, I think we could imagine the splintering of the party in the course of the next couple of years. Am I missing? I came in a bit late. Am I okay with that?
Yeah, no, I think you're fine. I want to get back to John Nichols, who I know has a short deadline here, and then we're going to bring in Wendell Potter. Wendell, are you with us on the phone? Apparently not. John Nichols, to this point, we were talking with Harvey earlier about the need for good jobs at good wages and how the Green New Deal can be a big part of that for Wisconsin and the Midwest, Ohio, Michigan, et cetera. If you can keep somebody in their jobs, then obviously those numbers, don't go astronomical. And for that to be the case, it may indeed help Trump, which is why he may want to actually sign the bill, because if people are working, then he may end up voting for him. Your thoughts there, Mr. Nichols?
Well, good policy is often good politics. And so you're right to imagine that if the right person got Donald Trump's ear, they might even convince him to sign something like this. But I doubt that Mitch McConnell would let it get that close to him. And one of the things to understand is that this fight that Pramila Jayapal has taken on, which, by the way, is backed by major union and endorsed by many of the top economists, people like Robert Reich and Joe Stiglitz, is a fight that basically challenges the systems that are now in place. And it's a much bigger deal than I think people understand. And I think the kind of people that would understand it, unfortunately, are folks like Mitch McConnell. They know that if you put in planning, if you actually put in structures that will mitigate against the surges and downturns of the economy, that's going to stabilize a lot of stuff. People are going to love it. In fact, it will indeed create a stability and a functionality in society that has an appeal politically and socially. What I mean by that, and the thing to take in here, is the reason that Republicans were so militantly opposed to the mid-level reforms of the Affordable Care Act was simply that it brought structure in. And once you bring structure in, once you bring in planning and some sort of approach that makes sense, people are going to say, well, why don't we have more of that? And That's what you have in Germany. That's what you have in Scandinavia. That's what you have in a lot of places around the world, and it works. And so this is why there'll be resistance to it. And my argument would be is this is a place where Democrats ought to fight like crazy. They ought to just put everything they've got into fighting for this, because it's not just the possibility of a victory in the moment, in this crisis moment, something that's really good for, as Joe suggests, small businesses, and as other folks here have suggested, for working class folks. It's also good for society, and it's good politics. And so I would wish that Pelosi would take it on. I will tell you flat out, as somebody who covers Congress, very hard to pass ultimately at the Senate level. But once you've set that fight up, where you've got the Democrats on one side clearly advocating for something that makes sense, the Republicans saying no, that's a fight I'd like to take into a general election. Because, one final element I'll say on this is, my sense in this moment is the Democratic Party has shot way too low on every issue.
All the time.
But they haven't set that aspirational high goal, which they then can bargain from. I acknowledge that you don't get everything you want when you don't control the Congress. But if you're asking for a lot, then you bargain down to something at the mid-level, rather than asking for the mid-level or less, which is what they're doing now, and bargaining down to that which is fully unacceptable. So I think what Guy Paul's doing is a really big deal.
I want to just one of Jeff's points.
Actually, Joe, if you could just 1 second, I want to get in Wendell Potter here if he's with us. Wendell, can you hear me?
I don't see him here, Jeff.
No, he's on probably on audio. But all right, actually, Joe and then Rob Scott. I want to get you on both of these. Go ahead, Joe.
The point I want to make is Pelosi and leadership aren't going to do this because the donor class loves what's happening. The donor class from big industry, and in particular big monopolies, are having a field day with M&A right now. And Silicon Valley investors in particular absolutely want a future where there are fewer and fewer for small businesses. Like, monopoly power is the essence of modern tech investing. And tech money is controlling the Democratic Party funding, as is Wall Street money. And the current path works great for them. And so I'm terribly cynical and pessimistic that we're going to be able to peel away the Democratic leadership from the grips of, the monopoly funders.
Well, Rob, go ahead. I want to get you in here before we take a break, which we will do at about 28 past, and then hopefully be rejoined by a few more of our regulars. And I know, John Nichols, you have to run too. Rob Scott, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think Joe's right. There's a tremendous concern about the rise of monopoly power, and it has to be confronted. But there are competing forces, and I want to go back to the idea of the Jayapal Paycheck Protection Act style proposal, because it does two things. Economically, it keeps workers attached to the firm, and that means they get their benefits. And this is the big problem with the unemployment approach. People become detached from the firms and
end up with the Cobra snake. Yep. End
up Cobra, and the firms go out of business. So there's no job to go back to. Economically, again, if you compare the countries like Denmark and Britain and even Canada, they're following the paycheck protection model. They're paying the firms to keep workers employed. Those countries are going to have much lower levels of unemployment, even 6 months or a year from now, even 2 years from now, than we did. And then those are according to IMF projections. In terms of the politics, I just want to point out that there are millions of small business owners that are at risk. Bloomberg had a story last week saying that half of them were going to go out of business in 6 months. Those people vote too, and they have influence in the party, especially with the Democrats. And so I think you do have the possibility for, again, a left-center or even left-right coalition there to support that. It's something not to be discounted.
I think one of you said that, I think it was you, John Nichols, but Rob, that Schumer is now endorsed this. Is that correct?
I don't know if Schumer has. I haven't seen anybody else does.
Is that you, John, that came with that idea?
It was not, although there's been a lot of good talk about this from many members. And the one thing to understand is that there's two tracks of it. There's what Pramila Jayapal is proposing, and that's very parallel to what Bernie Sanders has talked about. There's also another track, which is a more moderate approach, frankly, proposed by Rosa DeLauro and Mark Pocan and some others, which it directs much more aggressively into sustaining small businesses, but uses some of the same model. So you've got several plans floating around right now. And the bottom line is that all of it inserts a measure of planning and a measure of structure in. And that's the thing we're going to need, because as we surge and then hopefully dial back from the pandemic, we always have to be concerned that there will be another surge, that the fall could be difficult. And if you put in a measure of planning at this point so that companies know, small businesses know, that, yeah, if things go down, we can still keep our workers on. We're going to get more government support. It will adjust to that. And then as things get better, we can, have that adjustment in the other direction. That is something that small business desperately needs, which is stability, some measure of stability, some measure of certainty. And the interesting thing is that, just to put one final political note on this, if I was the Democrats, I would be doing a full-on small business message on this, and just go hardcore to the wall and say, you need to understand small businesses across America. The Chamber of Commerce, the big corporations, they've been lying to you. And now they are, as is well stated by other folks here, they're going to screw you out of everything that you have. And so now is the time for Democrats to actually do what progressives did in the 1920s and 1930s, which is make small business and small farmers a central part of their coalition. This fight can be won. Doesn't have to be won on the floor of Congress initially. It can be won in the battle of ideas across America. But you've got to get people like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi to actually speak that language. And
I don't have a lot of faith in that. John Nichols, if you could stay with us, I want us to go through this break here. We're going to be joined, I should say, by a couple of people, Robert Kraig and hopefully Melissa Tomlinson. Unfortunately, Wendell Potter tried to get in, but technically we couldn't make it work. So we're going to take a brief time out here and come back and be joined. And Ken will stay with Rob Scott and Harvey Kaye and Joe Sanberg, and we're going to ask John Nichols to stay with us for another 5 minutes. And then hopefully Robert Kraig and Melissa Tomlinson will also join in. We'll have a couple of callers as well, and we'll take that coming up right now here on the Jeff Santos Show. We'll back on Tuesday. We'll replay this program on Monday, on Memorial Day, folks, and we look forward to it. We'll be right back after this timeout.
And I fall back down. I fall back down. No, I fall back down.
Supporting the middle class. This is the Jeff Santos Show.
33 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show. We are on Zoom today doing our second hour. In the third hour, we'll talk to former Ohio State Senator Nina Turner and former Florida Congressman Alan Grayson coming up in the third hour of the Jeff Santos Show. We'll replay this entire show on Monday, Memorial Day. We're back live on Tuesday. We are rejoined for a remaining few minutes by the nation's national affairs correspondent, John Nichols. Rob Scott, Economic Policy Institute, is with us. We are with Harvey Kaye of the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, great author on FDR as well. Joe Sanberg, Aspiration, will continue to give us an understanding of what his company is doing and how it is important, and how, frankly, if Joe decides to run for office, I think that's also a major part of what we have to get to in this progressive conversation that we're having. We are trying to connect with Robert Kraig and Melissa Tomlinson, and hopefully we can get that going in the next few minutes. Our great producer, Ron Kreider, is working on that as we speak. I want to go to John, who's still there. John, if you have a question for the panel, because I know we're going to have to get a couple of other callers in here, go right ahead.
Well, I do have two interesting news stories. Yesterday, I had read that Tim Walz wants to have more testing done, and he ordered, the state of Minnesota ordered more testing, and it's being held up by the federal government, and wherever it is, who knows. And then also for nurses to have more personal protective gear, or PPE, that's also being held up by the federal government. So I don't understand why. I mean, I keep hearing this over and over and over again, and to me this is unconscionable. I mean, so essentially what they're saying is that the residents of Minnesota should die, essentially, because if you don't have testing and you don't have protective gear and you work in a hospital, then your chances of either transmitting the disease or getting it yourself or bringing it home into the community increases, like, 100-fold. So what's that all about? I'd like to know.
Well, Harvey and then John, because I know you have to run, John. Let's do it that way, and then we'll get the others as well. Harvey?
I mean, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I think the Republican Party has become a death cult. Period.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty true. John, you want to add to that? John Nichols?
I think that term has been used a bit, but I do think there's a deeper thing going on here. The Republican Party and its allies have staked an immense amount of their electoral hopes this year on a strong economy. And they, I think, have miscalculated very, very badly. Their assumption is that if you just kind of barrel forward toward reopening, that somehow most things will come together. And the mistake that they make is that testing actually is their best friend. If you have massive testing, if you have it readily available, then reopening the economy becomes a much easier task, a much more possible task. So they're actually doing exactly the wrong thing. And I would argue that it is because this is a political party that has rejected science. And, their rejection of science seems like, it's something we talk about. We make it even a slogan at times, that Democrats are for science, Republicans not. But I don't think people fully understand the extent to which it really has been rejected. And so as a result, they are now doing things that are bad for their political agenda, because they really do desperately want to reopen it the fastest possible rate. And the one final thing I'll note here is, as regards testing, the countries around the world that bought in a deep way to testing at the earliest possible moment, and Germany's done an immense amount of it, but also places like Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Many of these places are now actually coming out of this crisis and reopening, not necessarily in a perfect sense and not necessarily as easily as we might hope, but it is working in other places. And so I do think that what needs to be done now, final element before I have to take off, and I apologize for that.
No worries.
But the thing that I think needs to be done now is the Democratic Party, because we end up with a two-party system at this point at least. The Democratic Party really has to get its act together as regards coherent messaging. The problem here is that we've got a bunch of governors who are doing, sometimes very good work, but they're all coming from different places, different crises. We have some members of Congress who are speaking up. We have, apparently, there's a presidential front runner, Biden, I think his name is, and he's in his basement someplace.
Yes, he's in his dungeon. He doesn't come out except he has like a softball interview on MSNBC or CNN.
It's a completely incoherent messaging, and in any other country in the world, in like I'm telling you, any country in the world, you would have if you're the opposition party, you'd have a front bench that was ready to manage messaging. You'd be coordinating on a daily basis. And actually this Zoom moment that we're in makes that easier. It's not harder, it's easier. And you would just go to that core message, and the message of this week, I would think, or as our questioner asked, could easily be testing, and you just bang away on testing for a week, and then you move to the next issue. And I've covered politics for a very long time. I have no idea why the Democratic Party doesn't do this basic step. Because the fact of the matter is, I think on the testing issue alone, you could shred the Republicans. They'd be done. With that, I'll turn over to smarter people than I.
No. Thank you, John Nichols. All the best with your great book. A look at Henry Wallace is an important thing for any progressive or any American, really. And check out that great book. That is, I think, making its way up the New York Times bestseller list, my friend. All the best, John. Let me bring in Joe Sanberg here, because you understand the small business scenario, and you understand, how to put this all together. And I want to get Harvey on this too. It's frustrating as a lifelong progressive. I remember my first presidential perspective was Gary Hart's campaign, and he didn't know how to deal with a number of issues. And then again, Walter Mondale, lost 49 states. So, and in fact, I think we are actually in a Walter Mondale moment, because if you remember back to 84, we were in a scenario where a vice president is running, and you had a scenario they had to pick a woman, they had to have a woman, and they had to get somebody to sort of buttress the candidate. And what do we end up with? We end up with losing 49 states. Joe, you were younger back then, but we really need a messaging, and we really need to get it maybe from some of the grassroots people that you're in California with to lead the way. Well,
it ain't going to be in 2020. We've got a nominee, and we just got to make the best out of the Biden campaign. I think we're probably more likely in a place like 64 in terms of the progressive movement, where Goldwater really sparked a lot of the energy, but it was, if you will, it was more of a protest conservatism. And then eventually Reagan turned that protest conservatism into a governing conservatism. Now, we may obviously disagree with the tenets of it, but as a matter of analysis, I think that's basically what happened in those 20 years. I think similarly, we're in the moment where we're still amidst a protest progressivism, and the charge for us in the next couple of elections is going to be how we evolve that into a governing progressivism.
There's no doubt. Rob Scott, your thoughts on this subject matter?
Well, I think the idea of putting together elements of a business labor coalition to pull some of that together and to demonstrate that planning can have a big impact are critical. We have to recognize that enormous pieces of the economy are going to be decimated by this crisis. We're going to lose large segments of the tourism and retail trade business, travel and hotels and tourism of all kinds are going to shrink enormously. The airlines are going to collapse after the bailout ends, I think at the end of September. So we're going to need millions of jobs to replace the ones that we're going to lose. So we need both a relief plan to get us through the worst of the downturn, but we also need a rebuilding plan. And to me, the key legs, we've already talked about the Green New Deal, that's critical, infrastructure. The third piece, which I think is also essential and is illustrated by the problems we've had in the pandemic, we need to reshore production, not just of PPE, but of everything from consumer electronics, networking gear to advanced machine tools and even defense equipment. All of this is vulnerable because we're vulnerable on all these fronts because of offshoring. So I think the key is to rebalance trade, rebuild infrastructure, and convert to the Green New Deal. And we can create millions of jobs in a process that pay a lot more and have a lot better benefits than the ones that we lost in the downturn.
And, Jeff, I think one of the framings, because you mentioned message, is that we need to explain to people that between Republicans and Democrats, we're facing a choice between authoritarianism and self-determination that dives all the way into your economic life. The Republicans and some Democrats who are championing this monopoly economy that's controlled by fewer and fewer and fewer companies means that a smaller number of billionaires control where you get to work, whether and how you get to bargain for your wages, and what you get to buy. And what Democrats need to stand for, by contrast, is ensuring that there is a hyper-competitive economy for your labor and for your dollar. Right? We've, over the last 40 years, rapidly moved towards an economy where there are fewer companies selling goods that you need and fewer companies offering employment. Well, a basic analysis of supply and demand says if you're a worker, you're going to have more wages if there are more places offering employment. And if you're a customer, you're going to get better deals if there are more places offering goods and services. Republicans and some Democrats have rapidly moved us to an economy where fewer small businesses exist to offer employment and fewer small businesses exist to offer goods and services. And who are the losers? Workers and all of us individually as consumers.
Yeah. No, I mean, with the whole grocery store situation, they have got relief, but the small mom and pops, can barely survive is a great example of that. I just wanted to quickly, Ron Kreider, if we can, do we have either Robert Kraig or Melissa Tomlinson on the line?
We do.
Okay. Robert Kraig, Wisconsin Citizen Action Executive Director. I want to get your thoughts on what we've been talking about here. I'm not sure how much you have heard, but I think, messaging is a big part of what John Nichols said. Frankly, outside of Ms. Jayapal and a couple of other progressives, it hasn't really worked very well, particularly from Joe Biden.
Well,
Robert?
I think can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah. And I've been listening to this whole question, starting with the first two answers, including John Nichols. One of the challenges Biden has, I think, would be a difficult challenge for any nominee, and that is that you have an ongoing legislative crisis and crisis in government right now, where the Democrats hold one house, not the Senate, not the presidency, and therefore the agenda is very much being set by a caucus, a House caucus, which Nancy Pelosi represents and is a strong leader of, but cannot just do what she wants. She's not an executive. And as a result, that's all the horse train that gets a consensus among that whole breadth of the caucus, everything from, the Connor Lamb wing, that is the new Democrats that were elected in Republican districts and during the backlash in 2018 to Trump trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, to Pramila Jayapal and AOC and the other hardcore progressives, Mark Pocan in the state of Wisconsin. And so as a result, it doesn't come out like some sort of coherent policy. And the problem Biden has is he can't really propose a different platform, even if he wants to. And whether he wants to is an open question, because he can't step on what the House Democrats are trying to do in this highly contentious fight. And they have, to their credit, gotten the only good things we've gotten in relief packages so far into them. They're not nearly enough, but it was horrendous what McConnell and Trump would have done if left to their own devices. And one can only imagine what it would have been like if Paul Ryan was still Speaker and we hadn't taken back the House. And so it's a challenge. The way I would put it, to riff on what some of the respondents have been saying is that while the Republicans are selling the old Ford Pinto, it has an exploding gas tank, right, Chef?
Yeah.
The Democratic message is,
we get the Chevy Nova?
We have the Chevy Vega. That was the competitor, which was a crappy small car. And hey, at least it doesn't explode, but it's not really that good a car. And it certainly isn't a world-class car as far as safety, like a Volvo was at that time. And so, in other words, that's not.
Where's Ralph Nader? We need him.
At least we're not the Pinto. We're the Chevy Vega.
Jeff,
Harvey Kaye, I know you want to get in on there.
A whole slew of things went racing through my head. First of all, I definitely want to compliment Joe. I think he was right on regarding both the question of small business, as Ron implied too. But also, I think notice the language that Joe just used, authoritarianism versus, I don't remember the other term, but what struck me is the Democrats have got to stop targeting Trump as the enemy. He is the enemy. They need to start targeting the entire Republican establishment as
Mitch
authoritarians. Okay, that is absolutely essential. The other thing is, on a brighter note, what I want to say is that right now, if you thought about the bailing outs that we've seen, the one bright spot was the spot that tells us exactly what the Democratic Party's problem is. And that was the way in which the airlines were actually handled. Sarah Nelson led a campaign because she represented an effective labor union and a host of labor unions in negotiations that provided the salaries and wages to the workers through the airlines. I think we talked about how, the comparison between what we've done as a nation versus what the Europeans have done. Well, that's the model. And the point is that not only the model right now, it's the point in this way. Unless the Democrats figure out a way to truly get labor on board, number one, and to empower labor in the near horizon, everything we want to do is going to be up in the air.
I agree with you. I want to bring in somebody from labor. If she is there, Melissa Tomlinson, the executive director of Badass Teachers. Melissa, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, it's great to have you on. Sorry about the video issues. Let me take what Harvey just said here. Labor is an important piece. Teachers are an important piece of labor. I think Harvey's spot on here. Your thoughts about that and where, teachers, particularly now we're going to have a crisis come up in September, open the schools, open them up halfway, all of these issues. Your thoughts?
I completely agree with that. We've been working over the past 5-6 years to really bring back that deep-rooted organizing and the power of labor and the power of unions within our own rank and file membership, behind the scenes and building and building and building. And we have to question the Democratic Party at this time, let alone the Republican Party, and ask exactly what are we building for? What are we going to put our lives on the line for if we're not going to get some kind of substantial change to everything that is, undermining our society right now? We need our supports. We need our families and our communities to have the access to health care, to have the food security, to have the housing security. And everything that they're putting forward right now is exactly, I loved that car analogy. That was perfect. It's the same model, but at least it doesn't blow up. That's exactly what they're asking us to accept, and we can't do it again. And, I was talking with Senate candidate Lawrence Ham last night. He's on the Not Me, Us slate under Bernie Sanders, and he completely, he said educators are the largest unionized, organized force. So it is definitely going to become a battle in September.
Joe Samberg, I think you wanted to weigh in here. Go right ahead.
Well, we can all agree country has to come before party. And with that in mind, I'm going to say something a little bit unconventional. There are Republicans that we can work with on this issue. In fact, embarrassingly, there have probably been as many Republicans, if not more, than Democrats leading on this question of payroll guarantee. I mean, Josh Hawley from Missouri was out, on it, and obviously we disagree with him and others on zillions of issues. But the Republican Party on this question of populist economics is less a monolith than it used to be. And I think if we're going to be pragmatic in how we get some of this passed into law, there are opportunities where we can create interesting and different coalitions than than maybe we could have 10 years ago. There is a real populist element in the Republican Party that's very anti-monopoly, very anti-big tech. And, where we can work with them to get the job done for working Americans, I think we should.
Rob Scott, I know you're in Washington. I think you're one of the only panelists that is in that great city. I'm being facetious now. I lived there for 9 years. It's a cult city, really, when you get down to it. Is there anything that is generating, that the Jayapals, the Pokans, the progressives are pushing that, again, I think it was the last panel we had, somebody mentioned that Schumer may be interested in the Jayapal. It might have been Norman Solomon of Roots Action. Is there anything that you're hearing through this? You're from, thankfully a progressive think tank there in D.C. but or are these people just blinded? I mean, when I hear Biden and Pelosi talk, I'm thinking they got to be on their own planet. It doesn't exist in reality.
I think you're right. There's a real problem there. I think though that the growing unemployment explosion is going to just overwhelm them. It's going to be a tsunami this summer, and I think part of the thing that's going to move us into perhaps a more progressive direction is Trump himself is going to be increasingly desperate. He's going to wake up and realize, unemployment's going to go from 14% last month to 21% next month, and there are going to be many more who aren't counted, and the breadlines are going to grow. And this is, his desperate campaign to be reelected. He's suddenly going to realize he needs more money going directly to consumers, and he'll be more open to looking at concessions. And that's the moment, I think, when there'll be an opportunity to come back with more proposals like the Jayapal proposal, or even, the frankly very flawed HEROES Act that did pass the House last week.
Thank you. We just lost Joe Samberg. Joe, thank you so much for being with us. I want to go to a caller. Stephen in Livermore, California. If you have a question, go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead,
Yes,
Stephen.
can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. There's been a lot of great conversation this afternoon. Thank you for putting this on. I just want to say, hopefully the next time we do this, we can look at where are we going to go? Because we have to have a consensus of what we're going to do. I really feel that Joe Biden isn't the best candidate, okay? Today, he said some racist thing. I think we're going to lose. And that's number one. Number two, I guess I can give this question to Harvey. Number two is I think I'd love to have a different name for progressive, because right now it's too fashionable to say progressive. Nancy Pelosi says she's progressive and she's against Medicare for all. And lastly, I think we need to look at the Democratic Party. We keep saying the Democratic Party is being pushed left. They're not. They're sort of like the person we keep asking out. They're just not into us. So we have to look at it at a different way.
Yeah.
So which way and how do we bring everything together? I think, lastly, we need some type of, let's use a sports analogy, a coach, if you will. And we, the people, are the role players. We need our starting strong five. Many of us have just watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. Not a fan. I was a big Larry Bird fan. But you see, he could not have won the championships without the role players, but he had his starting five. Who will that be, and where do we go from here, Harvey?
Okay, so
I want to get Robert Kraig on this too. Go ahead, Harvey.
Yeah, look, another word besides progressive, you've got me. I mean, there's an old term liberal, but that's going to alienate too many people.
How about a progressive populist, Harvey?
Progressive populist, yeah. I mean, that's a little too sophisticated.
Robert Kraig, you want to add on to 60. What our good friend had to say?
I tend to think, we could call them radicals, I'm not sure, or socialists, but I honestly think we just have to enforce progressive. That's what conservatives have done, right? And enforce the boundaries by making it clear what the definition is. And I think it's absolutely right that this crisis is going to get so bad, a public health crisis and a depression together, that the old politics isn't going to work anymore. So there's going to be an opportunity to redefine everything in a much bolder way, including what a progressive is.
Robert Kraig, Harvey Kaye, Rob Scott, Melissa Tomlinson, we apologize for some of the video issues. We thank you all for being with us today. It has been great. We'll be right back after this timeout.